Hi everyone, and welcome back to the VID21 conference. My name is Julia Steele, the creator and host. If you're in our first session this morning, welcome back. If this is your first session for VID, welcome. I'm incredibly excited for our next session. This guy I've seen speak many, many times. He is the one and only amazing Dom Price. I've seen Dom speak many times on stage. He is a work futurist at Atlassian. More importantly, he was born to joy in the harsh Manchester winter of '77. He's traveled the world, Europe, US, Asia PAC. He's an accomplished TED speaker. He's very proud to work at Atlassian, hence the t-shirt that you'll see him wearing. He's renowned for everything to do with the future, their team playbook. He has a deep passion for understanding how teams work, the changes that we need to make to build a thriving business. He was the former GM of program management of a global gaming company and a director at Deloitte as well. So keen traveler. He's been to 50 countries. After 17 years here in Australia, he now calls Australia home. And I have to say, as a fellow POM, he's one of my favorite people that I've met since I've been here. So I'm just going to say hello and welcome, Dom. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Thank you. That was a rousing introduction. I'm excited to hear me.
Thank you so much. And look, we've got some great people joining from around the world, and I really appreciate your time. We are going to freewheel this and just do Q&A. And as we were talking in the break before we started, there's so much going on in the world that we would start with some questions and see where the conversation takes us, and then also just get some questions from everyone that's joining in the sessions as well. So we did a bit of pre-work and asked people on LinkedIn in particular what they would ask Dom if it was live and unscripted. And so this is going to be hopefully rapid fire, but I want to start with where I last saw you speak, and that was at TEDx in Sydney. And for people that haven't seen the video that I shared on the community, do you just want to start with why you did that talk and why now and what it meant to you?
So I mean, 2020 was a messed up year for everyone, right? And I'm no different, no worse, no better. It's an interesting one. There's a huge amount of serendipity in 2020 for me. So I've been talking to the curators, Fenella and Kirsty from TEDx for a while and trying to find the right time. And they had this theme last year, which was raw. They wanted rawness, and it was meant to happen in May. And so I was gearing up and I was looking at topics. I was getting myself in the zone. Just as context, like talking at TED had been a life goal for me. And I was like, oh my God, I'm going to get to live my life goal. And it kind of felt a little bit weird, right? But as May approached, two things happened, right? And this is just like how I think we sometimes think we're in control of the world and how we're really not. First of all, I got my own diagnosis. So I've been going for regular tests for years due to some family history stuff. And my doctor gave me a call and said, Dom, you've got early stage bowel cancer. I need to refer you to a specialist. Whilst it's early stage, it's kind of bad because your family history. And I ended up very quickly, actually within about a week, going under the knife and having surgery to remove my colon at Macquarie University Hospital, which was, they did an amazing job, and I'm very thankful for that. And then COVID happened. We went into lockdown. My plan was that I wanted to get back to the UK because my older sister Trudy had been suffering for 6 years with quite progressive breast cancer that had spread across her body, and I wanted to be able to go back and hang out with her and her two boys. And there was this realization whilst I was in recovery of going, what do you mean you've closed the borders? You can't close the borders. I'm going to get on a plane, like whatever. And then I just thought it was a loophole. I'm like, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. Like borders, whatever. Or it'll be a 2-week thing. You know, I mean, we closed our office for 2 weeks a year ago. And so you've got this moment, it'll be fine. And then this sinking realization that it wasn't fine and I wasn't in control of it. Now, thankfully, I managed to get, after filling in 1 million forms, managed to get a government exemption and got back to the UK. And very grateful because I managed to have 3 very precious weeks with my sister before she passed away, which is, you can't put a value on in any stretch of the imagination. But then the whole thing happened, which is the week she passed away was the week I should have been doing my TED talk. TED got delayed till November. I then arrived back in quarantine in Sydney. And I just remember sitting there in this hotel room all by myself. I've gone through 2 massive life-changing events. It's not even halfway through 2020. And I'm like, what on earth is going on? Like, I'm up for a test. Like, I like a challenge. Like, someone says something, I'm like, bring it on. But I'm like, it's halfway through the year. I'm kind of done already. And then I realized that actually I had to find the upside from it. Like, what are the stuff I could take from it? How could I find joy, momentum, happiness? How could I dig deep and find that? And that's what I ended up doing my talk on in November, which was both a very cathartic and exhausting exercise. I don't think I've ever been so emotionally tired as I was the day having delivered my TED talk and going into some kind of weird zone to deliver it and just sort of almost second nature. And then coming off stage and just going, oh, like I had nothing, because every ounce of me had gone into the prep and the delivery, and I wanted to deliver it with the level of vulnerability and rawness, right? Really, the theme was raw. So it was I feel very privileged to have had that opportunity. I think it's like almost part of my therapy, but you know, it's a fascinating experience to do that and get it out there. But then it happens twice, because we did it live on the day, Jules, which you saw on November 6th. And then in the background, they do all the editing, the curation and stuff. And so on the 1st of January, it's just so weird, because I'm like, 2020 is done, it's 2021, it's a new year, new me, new everything. And someone pings me and goes, oh, I've just seen your TED talk. It's inspirational. I was like, oh, I'm knowing to live it all over again, which was a good live it all over again. But you go through that emotional mill, like for a second time. And it's not a second time. Every time someone messages you, it's a 3rd, 4th, and 5th, which is great, because you're seeing people open up and you're seeing that vulnerability, which, God forbid, we need so much more of in the world right now. But it's exhausting at the same time. So a great experience.
Yeah, no, it's I remember actually reaching out to you last year when I had the original idea for VID and said, can you come and speak? Can you come and speak? And you just said, now's not a good time. And I was just like, oh, that's unusual. And then I found the whole story and I was like, yeah, okay, I'll let you off.
Yeah, fair call. Yeah.
Fair call, right? just a little bit going on. But one of the questions that came through is, I mean, you've talked about your own journey through last year and how reflexive you got through some of that. But what do you see as, what's happiness mean to you in terms of the future? What are the things that you were looking for?
I think there's a couple of aspects, and I'm not an expert on this. I've only got my own lived experience, right? So that's my caveat. I'm not going to tell anyone else how to live their lives. I'm not that egotistical, but I think there is a step right now that's become more apparent through COVID around what we're in control of and what we're not. And I don't like to split people into stereotypes. Like, the worst thing for me is like Myers-Briggs. Or like when someone does one of those personality tests and they're like, you're one of these. I'm like, I'm not a one of anything. I don't fit in a box. Stop trying to put me in a box. But I think if you were to separate the world into 2 sets of people right now, it's the ones that think things are happening to them and the ones that have a sense of either control or influence over, and happiness is one of those things that they have control and influence over. And I think it's more profound right now than ever before, because there is so much going on in the world and there is a lot happening to us that we're not in control of. I think we've just got to accept that. It's about finding the things that we can do. And it's weird for me. Like, I've always had quite a positive attitude about life. And even last year when all the proverbial hit the fan, I still just kind of kept on going. But it's weird how you're like, when you do that, it builds momentum. You find more little things that you can do. And so even when the pandemic first hit, I remember going out one day, my local coffee shop had just turned into a takeaway. And a friend of mine was just whinging, just, one of those people. We've all got a friend that just sees the downs. They'd win the lottery and complain that it was too much. That person, right? And that person was having a whinge, and I was like, oh, I'm having a good day because I can go and get a coffee. Like, there's lots of people in the world that can't. And I just went downstairs and I just bought a coffee. Like, that's a good thing. Now, it's not going to change the world. It was a nice coffee. But I'm like, if you can't find the things to be grateful for and happy about, no one else is going to give it to you. Like, we can't wait. But the worst thing is, someone will give it to you, but they won't give you happiness. No. Right? So I think there's this reality now that we've got to kind of get a grip on the things that we can control and influence and start doing them, and then accept that not everything's going to go to plan. Like, and Jules, you've written about this and you know about this, but we always talked about like the best laid plans. I think now a time more than ever where plans are nice, but let's not pretend that that plan's the thing that's actually going to happen.
Yeah.
And so how do we build a plan B or a plan C, or how do we just build the muscle of being adaptable, of going, yeah, stuff is going to happen, but I feel resilient, if that's the word we want to use, or whatever other word you want to use, and go, I'm just going to go with it. I'm going to try a little bit more here and pull back a bit more there and try a bit more there and just adapt with it. But I think getting to understand those things of what we can do and where we can impact, I think could be our superpower if we choose to tap into it.
Yeah, and I think that choice and being able to choose, regardless of what uncertainty is happening in the world, we never lose our right to choose what we do next.
Yeah,
I know from conversations that I've had, particularly since the start of this year, is, well, just because last year was what it was doesn't mean that this year has to be the same, and you can actually choose to reframe whatever it is that you want. And some of the choices I've personally found myself is like, well, I didn't like that pre-COVID. Like, I didn't like commuting to the town every day pre-COVID. So now I have an office that's a kilometre from my house, and I cycle here every day.
Yeah.
So, and that's a choice that I've made.
Yes.
So,
but I think you've hit the nail, a very subtle nail on the head there, Julie. Right. So every decision, everything we're in control is a trade-off. And I find, and I'm guilty of this, right? I'm a 43-year-old middle-aged white man, right? That I want both. It's like, oh, but I missed the commute into the city because I could hang out with people and go for Japanese and go for a drink after work. I missed that. And they're like, well, why don't you do that? Well, it's too far. I want to stay. It's like, pick one of them, right? And I think that the reality is that if we can have conversations about trade-offs, like, yeah, a little bit from column B and a little bit from column A, instead of doing absolutes, right? And instead of going, it's all of one or all of another. And I think sometimes we over-engineer it to be all of one. Like, when the world returns to some level of normality, if one more person asks me, will I work from home or the office, as if they're the only options, I pull out the remaining hair that I've got. Because we've got this binary view. It's like, what are you going to do? First of all, can you guess in a year's time? No, because it doesn't bear any reflection to the work I do, so it doesn't matter. So I'm place agnostic. I will find the place that's best for me, for the task I'm trying to do on the day that I'm trying to do it. You know, last week I hung out with 2 colleagues for the day and we had a little offsite, right? And it was really cute because we had Post-it notes and a whiteboard and pens who were like, oh, like it was like the biggest treat ever. And we got so much done because of the higher fidelity of the conversation. Now, they're guys that I've not hung out with for a year. We've worked fine for the last year, right? And so it's not that we have to be in the same room every day, nor do we have to be a million miles away from each other. It's about finding what works for the task that you're doing and the people that you're doing it with.
Absolutely. And I know that, well, yourself and Atlassian more broadly is sort of one of those companies that people are likely looking to, right? It's a bit like, well, what do we do, or what are Atlassian doing? So there's this bit of like comparisonitis going on. So what questions are you getting asked about the future, and particularly work, and what, I hate the phrase new normal, is going to look like, because I don't believe in that, but what are conversations are you having? What are people asking you?
So I think it's pertinent, Jules, given it's me and you and it's a Monday morning, and the kind of people that I'm guessing are dialing into this thing, that we're honest, right? So let's talk about the honest conversations. If one more person asks me when Atlassian is returning to work, I might have to buy a gun, right? Because I keep on saying, we didn't stop working. You're like, no, but you know what I mean? I'm like, no, we didn't stop working. Like this whole, like, when are you returning to work, is predisposed on this idea that work and place are the same thing, and they haven't been. For knowledge workers, of which there's over 1 billion globally, they haven't been, right? So the first thing we've got to accept is we've got to change our questions. Second thing is we've got to accept that we are inadvertently creating a massive 2-tier system. Like, and there's several 2-tier systems, and they are not pretty. I mean, the first 2-tier system is the increase in sort of knowledge worker and skilled worker roles, and the net decrease in low skilled roles. And you're like, well, that's not good, because I can't necessarily see those people migrating to those roles. And so you've already got some inequality there. You then look at, and let's use the US because it's just easier to poke fun at our neighbors than it is to poke fun at ourselves. But the US in the month of December, their economy lost 140,000 jobs, okay? 100% women. Like 100% of the people that lost their job in the US in December were female. You're like, that's not good. Like, and then you're like, actually, it's beyond not good. It's awful. And yet, we've probably undone however many years of mediocre sort of diversity and inclusion work that we've been doing, which we're still pretty average at anyway. We need to do even more of. So whether it be this weird default view, like we've gone back to the 70s, that women need to be the caregivers and be at home and man go to work. There was a stat thrown around last week that 1 in 4 women in work right now are thinking of leaving the workforce. Right, which would be catastrophic for, and not diversity inclusion for any quotas or stats, just because diverse teams are more innovative. Yeah. Like diverse teams are better, and people deserve the right, the chance, the opportunity to go and have impact on the work. If they choose to, if they don't choose to, that's fine. But I think we're already seeing this 2-tier system being created, and so I think one of the questions is, how do we make this equitable? How do we make this such that flexibility doesn't mean that I turn around and go, oh, Julia's chosen the lifestyle path, right? She's got a cute little office a kilometre away, she's got a bike, and she's got all this stuff. But what that means is she probably doesn't want any complex projects. She's not up for promotion because she's not ambitious. I mean, I've made all those judgments just because Julia works from home. And you're like, those things aren't correlated or causated. And so I think we are, certainly in corporate Australia, same in the US and the UK, to be honest, we are so stuck in 1984. It's unbelievable. Like the conversations I have, I regularly wake up and go, is this some kind of weird Groundhog Day? Because we are going through an experiment, and we have gone through an experiment in the last year. Some of us are choosing to learn from it. Others are folding their arms, holding their breath, and there ain't no new normal for them. They are gasping to return to old normal, which, by the way, didn't work anyway, right? I mean, of all the bad things that have happened through COVID, let's take a moment to celebrate the water cooler, whose stock price has never been higher. Like if one more leader says, but how do we recreate the water cooler conversation? I'm like, all we did at the water cooler was gossip. No innovation has occurred at a water cooler in my entire career. Not a chance have I been there gasping for some H2O and gone, Julia, I've got a new product idea. Should we brainstorm? Right? We either talk about last night's TV, who in accounting's having an affair with someone from marketing. Like we never talked about anything work related, and that's fine. Let's admit that there was a social aspect to work that we want to recreate. But this whole idea that innovation occurred at water coolers, right? Or that actually there's any correlation between you being at a desk as a knowledge worker and the work that you do. Like you've been detached from that desk via work for about 10 years. You've been attached to that desk by a boss who believes that presenteeism equals productivity, right? And then we need to get onto the whole productivity bandwagon, which is a word that I absolutely detest, because we talk about productivity and then say things like, yeah, I mean, we need to be more creative and more innovative. And I'm like, cool, we'll stop measuring productivity then. Like, if you want to be innovative, give people space, time, freedom to go and do stuff, go and experiment, go and explore. That's very different leadership to how many widgets did you move in the last hour, please, Mary? And how many jobs did you get done, Bob? Like, and so our fetish and focus on productivity is just blind. And it's weird because we talk about it and then go, I'll tell you what else is important, people and mental health. And you're like, can you not understand how ironic you're being? There's still people in the press celebrating that through COVID, we saw a 5% rise in productivity. Like, I can't read the paper anymore without getting Tourette's and just shouting bullshit, because I don't believe any of it, for starters, because no one has a good way of measuring it. And then even if it was true, in Australia, our average working day went up by an hour. That's not productivity, that's longer working hours. It's a different title. So I think we've misunderstood the equation. We've misunderstood the role of work in life that, you know, me, you and Sarah briefly talked about before we started the call. And this concept of life is one bucket and work is part of it, versus trying to balance the two, which is just the wrong equation. And I feel for working parents. I feel for parents with school-age children, either with their homeschooling or not. And actually, one of the things that we did, and I'm guilty of this, right? I've already mentioned, if you've not noticed, middle-aged white guy. I thought I had decent empathy for the people I was working with. But one of the things I realized throughout COVID, none of us can see the chaos behind the camera, right? You can't see just the crap, like the laundry and the parents and the partners, right? And your husband or wife saying something like, I'm going to double click on that, and helicopter management. You're like, who is this person I'm living with? Right? They're not the same person that I married years ago, and the kids creating havoc. You can't see that chaos. And so we created this exercise called the work-life impact play that we have as a conversation as a team, which is your work from home setup, the nature of your role, how much you require, you're reliant on other people versus an individual contributor, and the nature of your social network. And through looking at those three elements, we have this very rounded conversation. And I'd sit there and go, oh, I live by myself in a little apartment, but I have no one to interrupt and no one interrupting me. And I never realized how privileged I was till I heard other people explaining this scenario they were working in. And then I started going, how do you get any work done? Like, I genuinely am applauding you for doing anything in that environment. So, you know, I think we talk a lot about empathy. We need to flip that from talking about it to just doing it.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And look, for people that joined VID last year, they'll know that I was pretty much camera on my laptop into a wall, and behind the laptop was everything you just described, the laundry, Riley doing her homework, Justin was studying law at the time. So, and our house is big enough for us to sleep in when we leave for the rest of the day. What we discovered is it's not big enough for us all to live in and work in all the time. And we had a lot of fun. It was we had a lot of fun with it, but at the same time, there was a lot of stress that comes with it. And I think the thing I'm finding really interesting at the moment is there's a lot of conversations about people that are working remotely, working flexibly, but there seems to not be a lot of conversation about the people that have no choice but to physically be at work.
Yeah.
And so what do you think in that regard? Like, how do we get the physical working, the remote working, and the flexible working all working together?
Yeah.
And end up with these, as you say, these tiers in our organizations. How do you think that's going to play out?
Yeah, it's true. I mean, right now we've got to accept that we're in a very constrained, I mean, Australia less constrained than the rest of the world, but a constrained environment, right? And we've got to hope or assume, I don't know which, that those constraints one by one ease, right? So let's hope that's true. Otherwise, the whole thing's messed up. As they ease, this is the experiment we've got to go through, right? So we know what a bad outcome looks like on a two-tier system, because you end up where instead of just competing with each other, you end up so inequity and so inequality that you might as well be rivals, even though you work in the same company. In some organizations, it's extreme enough. If you think probably like a McDonald's, like a fast food chain, right, or in Australia Post or something, where you've probably got like head office workers who are more like knowledge workers that are going to operate in one way, and you've got deskless workers or frontline workers that are going to operate in a different way. Now, that's always been the case, but what they had in common was this like 9 to 5, Monday to Friday stuff. And if we go, oh, you get flexibility over here, but you can't because you work in a McDonald's and it runs 24/7, it suddenly starts to feel like you're creating this two-tier system. What you do is you go, actually, the type of people that work in those roles have different demands. It may be that there's someone who wants to work in the McDonald's store that wants to work nights, right? Where actually working nights is better for them for whatever situation. So you can still say we have flexibility. How you implement that flexibility is going to be subtly different. And then this is where, and we've always had this in Australia anyway, with your enterprise bargaining agreements and different contracts and different structures, where you need to work out for that sort of sector of employee and the nature of their role they're doing. What are the perks? What are the incentives? How do you give them balance? How do you give them meaningful work? How do you give them a safe work environment, right? Where you know, certainly for frontline workers, where safety needs to get elevated, right? For anyone who goes to work certainly has the right to return home in a better state than they arrived in, right? So how do we make sure we're returning people not just mentally healthier, but physically healthier than when they arrived at work? And I think we've got a chance to do that. The danger is, and there's already a subtle narrative around this in some parts of the press, is around automation and robotics, where it's like, well, actually, we'll just the frontline stuff, we'll just automate it, we'll just make it a robot. We'll make it all this online thing. You're like, yeah, there's nuances there. I think there's cost savings and there's reasons for doing that in a 24/7 economy. But at the same time, there's a whole lot of services where I believe we would pay a premium or get a better service by doing it with a human. And I think we need to be careful where automation becomes a return on investment thing, right? It becomes a financial decision, which I don't often think is the right way, the right rationale to do it, versus what's the experience that I'm trying to give here, right? And how can I optimize that experience both for my employees, right? Because their experience as an employee matters, and for my customers. And if you can optimize that experience for both, then you're onto a winner.
Yeah. I know that I've had quite a lot of conversations with particularly people in the project space over the last year. And I want to swing back to what you were talking about in innovation. And I get this sense that a lot of, at least at the senior levels, innovation is seen as this discretionary thing that you allocate money to. And by allocating money to it means you then suddenly become more innovative. And then, but because of the financial hardships last year, a lot of that money was taken away in certain industries. So how do we reinvigorate that conversation? Because I know you and I have very similar schools of thought on this, which is you don't need a lot of money to have great ideas.
No.
In fact, you actually need no money to do.
Yeah, the idea generation itself is essentially free. The commercialization comes with a cost, but by that stage you're onto a winner. So like, why wouldn't you? Yeah, it's funny. I mean, you're spot on. There's an irony in the innovation conversation that, yeah, I liken it to the diversity and inclusion conversation. Like, we could have a very intelligent discussion about it and still do bugger all. Like, if you look at diversity and inclusion and you know, any even levels of quotas have been discussed for years and years and years. And you know, last year there were 25 CEOs appointed of various ex companies, and one of those was a woman. You're like, I mean, clearly talking about DI, I know it's International Women in Business Day today. It's like, clearly talking about it isn't generating the change. So what is the behavior we need to change? And I think innovation similarly is about behavior change. You know, I'm sure we've all been part of innovation theatre, which is alive and well in corporate Australia. You get the posters, you get the T-shirt. In some companies, yeah, you still get given a mouse mat, and it's like, right, you're an innovator, innovate, and you're like, that's theatre. That's the song and a dance, which is cool. Like, the board are impressed. I'm sure it makes it to a PowerPoint slide somewhere. Like, good on you. And it's probably quite cheap. The ROI is easy because you spend very little money. But there's no generation of new ideas or new equity there. You know, I think it is funny how when times are tough, what decision you make, how you deal with that fork in the road. We doubled down on our innovation when COVID hit. And a lot of people were like, what? And I was like, yeah, like, why not? Like, the world's going through a high amount of change. The great thing about uncertainty is it throws a whole lot of things in the air. It's actually the best time to innovate. And they're like, but and I was like, no, because we're planting seeds. Like, this is the time to do it. And if anything, I'd say we brought in our time horizon a little bit. I think in buoyant times, you can go longer term with your innovation. When the proverbial hits the fan, you might want to bring that in a few time horizons, because you probably want a quicker return. You want to get more certainty or more confidence early, which I think is fine. But we doubled down and we've released 2 beta products in the last 2 weeks, right? That we've been experimenting with in the background. And that's not come from investment. Our double down was time. Still an investment, but we didn't go to the bank and pull out, shed loads of cash and go, let's build an innovation hub and an innovation room, and let's go and buy 100 VR kits, right? And all the stuff that the old institutions do to create this sense of sort of innovation. We went, right, like what problems are our customers experiencing? Where are our customers moving to? What's changed in their world, in their environment? How can we build more empathy for them? What are the things that we can do to amplify the good behaviors and help them with stuff? Not just fix problems, but what are the opportunities we can go after? And then it's about getting not just our smartest people, but our most diverse people, and going, we're going to put you together, and it's going to feel quite tense at first. You're probably going to argue, and you're going to have wonderful, respectful dissent, right? It's what I look for in a healthy, innovative team. I'm like, if you're all violently agreeing, I've got the wrong people. I need to break you up. But if you're going, actually, Julia, I like your idea, but what about, and you're building on top of each other. You know, one of the phrases that we've started to use, and language is so important in innovation, is how might we, right? So, because every group has that naysayer, that won't work. And you're like, oh, and they just take all the wind out of your sails, and you just want to ignore them and have a meeting after the meeting to talk about them. And it's not very effective. And so we're like, cool, let's change our phraseology. So someone puts an idea forward, however wacky it is, you're like, okay, how might we do that? Or what would we need to do for that to be true? And it's all about the positive reinforcement. And it's not that generates more innovative ideas. It just allows us to navigate through those waters where you're like, is this really mental? Are we mavericks? Are we crazy here? And then the second part, and I think we're decent at this. There's pockets of this I find in corporate Australia, but it's not at the senior most level. Apologies to any CEOs that might dial in. It's not them, but there's definitely an element of strong experimentation. And I think if we can nurture that, if we can find those pockets of experimentation and give those people just a little bit more freedom, just a little bit more latitude, those experiments, because they're small, they're not bet the company stuff. So if it goes wrong, you don't lose, but you learn a huge amount. And certainly with the use of technology, I mean, we've had teams spinning up prototypes and stuff. It's all smoke and mirrors, but spinning up a prototype and doing like a customer demo of it and getting feedback within a week. Now, there was no actual product behind it. It wasn't real. It takes months to build a real version, but don't go and build a real version and test that. Test a dummy version, right? And get your first level of feedback and do some A/B testing. And so I think there's so much opportunity for us in Australia to do that. I think the hard thing, again, if we're deadly honest, the hard thing is we've made so much money the last 75 years through digging stuff out of the ground and printing money and calling them banks. The innovation just seems like something we don't have to do yet. And I think we do. I think now's a great time. I think if our export basket in even 10 or 15 years is the same as it has been for the last 75, we're probably going to find ourselves in a struggle. And I think there's so much opportunity for innovation. If you look at renewables, if you look at our ability to invest in tech and robotics, artificial intelligence, you know, the biotech, the fintech world, but even with the mining and minerals, which I know is not a popular sector for some, but there's a whole lot of stuff we dig out of the ground that we can turn into valuable things. We can turn it into batteries and turn it into stuff that helps the renewable sector, or we can sell it as raw materials to other people to make it, to add the margin onto. So I think just with some small rethinking and some small innovation, we can have an outsized impact on the world. And I think that's something we could all get behind. That'd be like a brand identity for Australia that would be a very positive one for us.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I know when you did your talk in Sydney, particularly around your personal moral inventory and the focus on purpose and planet and productivity, like they were all P's: productivity, profit, people, planet, and purpose. I think regardless of where the conversation around working from home or working remotely or working flexibly, whatever label we end up putting on it, people need to get back to having a clear purpose.
Yes.
Of what they're doing. And I certainly know from speaking to a lot of clients and that they want to make a difference, that people go to work to do something, and they want that to be meaningful. So how does purpose come through in what you do at Atlassian? Because I think there's the technical part of the conversation, but there's a higher order why. How do you get that?
So I want to challenge you on that, Jules, because I used to agree with you on that, and now I struggle a bit, if I'm deadly honest. I think the science is probably true, that if you get purpose and meaning, you get a sense of impact from your work, you're more motivated and you're more engaged, right? And they are not bad things, right? That's good. My issue with it is I think the narrative has been so overbaked. People have now reversed it and they've gone, I have to have meaning in work. Everything I do has to have impact and meaning. You're like, wow, that's not many jobs, probably not enough jobs for us all to have that, right? There's some jobs that are dirty jobs. There's a show called Dirty Jobs, and they're jobs that I don't think they get meaning or impact from. They just got to get done. You're like, okay, there's so many people that haven't got our privilege where they're working purely to put meals on the table. They don't give a shit about purpose. They care purely about pay, like pay me, feed me. Like there's so many people like on the poverty line or below that they're like, all these cute people talking about purpose, bless them. And so I think what we've got to understand is, where does purpose fit in? It's a higher order motivator. Like if you redraw Maslow's hierarchy, I think it's just above self-actualization. But I don't think it's a requirement. I think it's a nice to have. Yeah. And the reason I don't think it's a requirement is I think we have an opportunity, as me, you and Sarah talked about just before we started, I think it's about finding purpose in life, which is the 24 hours in a day, not just purpose in work, which is probably 7 or 8 hours a day. And I think we've over-indexed on getting purpose from work at the detriment of purpose in life, which is why we've got high rates of mental health issues and suicide and loneliness and a whole lot of stuff. And you're like, oh, but we're richer than we've ever been before as an economy, and people are well off, and it's sunny outside, everything's wonderful. You're like, well, why is everyone so miserable? Like, why is everyone like so sad? And so it's like, cool, how can we take a step back and go, where does work fit in? And I've met people in the last few years who work is something that they do purely for income. And I say, oh, I don't mind admitting this, I've looked down on them. I'm like, I feel so sad. Oh, I feel bad for you. And they're like, don't feel bad for me. I go, I do my thing, and I leave. And then I invest all my wisdom, my happiness, all my emotional energy in friends and family and community and social. And you're like, oh, actually, maybe you should be looking down on me. Maybe you think I'm the sad one trying to find purpose in work. Now, on saying that, I am actually grateful and very fortunate. I do actually have a job that I really enjoy. I'm fortunate to work for a company that has very similar values to me. And so that values alignment means that I get to operate very much my natural style and natural self without risk of recourse or anything else. We have a huge sense of openness. We have some, as senior leaders, some brutally honest conversations that honestly hurt and can be quite jarring, but are done in such a respectful way. And so I'm very fortunate to be in that environment. But I don't think my fortune in that environment means that I accept that's not available for everyone. So, you know, purpose for some people could be an income, right? It could be just for survival. And for many, it might even be not working, right? There's a whole lot of people I know that aren't part of the economy in terms of salaried roles, but do stuff in their life that gives them an amazing sense of meaning and impact, whether it be community work. You know, I've been doing a lot of work in the last year in the for-purpose sector, not-for-profit sector. And you look at those, you're like, you could pay those people half as much. They get so much satisfaction. Now, unfortunately, you can't pay your mobile phone bill with goodwill, right? So we all need a certain amount to live. And in Australia, that's an increasingly large amount. But I think we've historically had a correlation between income and wealth and happiness that I do not believe is there. And the more I meet really rich people, the more I definitely believe that correlation is not there. So I'm like, cool, where can we find our purpose and impact from? And what is that for each? And for each of us, that should be a very unique DNA. I think for every single one of us, it's not about going buying a book called Find Your Purpose and getting to chapter 10 and drawing a picture. It's about going, you know what, when I get to my end of my days here, whatever religious belief you are of what happened next, at that milestone of the end of your days here, what impact do you want to have had? What legacy? How do you want people to talk about you and what you did and how you made them feel? That's your purpose. So just go and do it. And if that's through work, awesome. I mean, you've got 2 for 1 then. You're getting paid and you're getting purpose. And if it's not through work, I think that's an okay conversation for us to have.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. One of the questions that was asked in the community before the session was, and this swings back to something you said earlier about particularly women in the workplace and International Women's Day, was how to deal with systemic bias in the way that we work together. So we're very fortunate, particularly this part of the world. When I work with my male colleagues, I feel there's mutual respect, but not everyone is necessarily in that same that same situation, depending on, you know, where they are in the world or the industry that they work on.
Yeah.
And you've already commented a few times about, you know, being a middle-aged white male, but what do you see? How do you see bias play out? And have you got any tips for people in overcoming that?
Yeah, I think, I mean, every day for me is a learning experience of what I do and don't know. Like I learn more about my blind spots every single day. Yeah, again, I'm very fortunate to be surrounded both in a work context and personal context. If we take the gender one as an example, by some amazing women, right, that help me, right? I'm perfectly imperfect in everything that I do, and when they help me understand that and help me get better at it, and as long as I continue to try at that, I think that's the aim of the game, right? So I don't think I'll ever get it right, but if I get better all the time, and I think the thing is, what I'm trying to say is we need to take account, make ourselves accountable for how we do it. I think a lot of this discussion is what the companies need to do, what the governments need to do, and they do. They all need to step up. But so do I, right? So do we. And we all have biases, right? Let's just admit it. I think the education part is very important. There's then a whole lot of systematic stuff you can do to help eradicate those biases. But then deep down, like, you have to value diversity, right? And a lot of us don't. A lot of us would prefer to work with like-minded people that just agree with us. It's quicker and it feels nicer. It delivers shit outcomes, right? But it feels good. You're like, oh, violent agreement. We're all the same. How cool is that? You're like, we're going nowhere really fast.
Than I expected. What is the price?
So I think it comes down to, like, what do we value? And you know, for me, And I can certainly attest. I remember when I first started at Atlassian, and I hated my first 90 days because of how much feedback people shared in the moment. And it's funny, I'd come from some very political work environments where you didn't tell people in the moment they were good or bad. You said nice things in the room, then you told a few people behind their back, and then eventually you got to them, and it was like the shit sandwich, right? And I arrived at Atlassian, and people were just like doing it straight away. And I remember going home and chatting to a mate. I was like, I don't know how they won best place to work. They are not nice people. And they were like, what? And I explained, and they're like, oh, and I was like, no, they're not nice. Like literally everyone's quite mean. And then I was like, no one's mean. Everyone's quite open and honest, but no one's actually mean. The intent is a very positive one. And so I had to pause and go, what behaviors have I brought along with me around being, I'm the senior person, therefore I should be right. Or, I'm the alpha male, therefore listen to me. It was all these bad behaviors in me. And when I shone that mirror on me, it wasn't pretty, right? It wasn't nice, but they're all behaviors. They could all be unlearned. And then you get to practice new ones. And it does take a bit of time, but I think we all have to go first. We can't wait for anyone else. And then I think the third thing for anyone on here that feels like they do have any privilege, and I'm one of them, is find a place where you can be an ally. And by the way, don't second guess at being an ally, because that's when we get it wrong. We can be quite patronizing. It's like, just go and ask someone, like, what can I do? Like, how can I help? And if me getting out the way is the way I help, that's what I'll do. So, I had a situation late last year with an amazing colleague, and I thought I was trying to be helpful by joining all these meetings and workshops and sessions. And we're having a chat one day, and I was like, she's just an amazing person. I was like, anything I can do to help, like anything. And she's like, yeah, step out of a few of the meetings. And I was like, why? And she's like, because when you're there, I'm not. When you're there, I don't need to be. So if you step out, people will rely on me. I get to step up. And I was like, oh yeah, it's easy. Like, give me the 3 hours back. Like, I was over the moon, but I thought I was there to help. And my intent was good. Good intent doesn't get you that far. Eventually, you've got to listen, and you listen with these things, right? I tend to try and listen with my mouth, which is really bad for me because I only hear what I say. But listening with my ears is a lot better. And listening with the right intent. Like, again, back to that phrase, how might we? Right? How might we work together in a better fashion? Dom, if we're running a workshop, I don't want you there, because if you're there, people assume you're running it and I want to run it. I'm like, cool, I'm out. Like, that's yours now. Let's send the message. You're accountable for it. You're responsible. Here's where I'm holding the bar for you, right? Like, it's fair. It's not a favor. I'm not doing you a special treat or anything. The bar's there and it's yours now. Go for it. And then how can I support in the background to make sure you're successful? So I think a lot of it is often simpler than we think, but it's also infinitely more complex, because for a lot of us, we've got to get rid of our egos. We've got to work out what we truly value. Like, do we actually value diversity? Do we want that respectful dissent? Do we want people to go, Dom, I don't think that's right. I've got a different idea. Like, can we talk about that? Are we going to hear it? Like, are we actually going to listen like we're wrong? A lot of the time we listen like we're right, but actually we need to listen like we're wrong. So I think it's eminently doable, but we're really going to have to invest in it in the medium to long term, because I think up front, it feels like a tax. And in the long term, it's definitely an investment. But when you first think about anything around D&I or anything around gender imbalance, it just feels like a tax.
Yeah,
it's not.
Agree more.
Yeah.
I think I look back over 20 odd years of working now, and I think there's only probably a handful of people that I would put in the category of obnoxious narcissists, just out for themselves. I firmly believe that most people go to work to do a good job of some description.
Yeah.
But they also, like you said, we all have blind spots. And the first question I always ask is, why is that happening? What do I need to do to understand what's going on? Is something going on that I need to understand more? Whether it's cultural differences or age differences or gender differences, all of those differences. But I couldn't agree more with it's got to start somewhere. And if that means me or you or the people on the call doing something different to learn something new tomorrow, then fantastic. And we've got a couple of, probably another 5 more minutes for questions. And I know Matt asked one in the chat. If anyone else has got a question, feel free to either pop it in the chat or unmute yourself. But Matt asked, could the expanded frame of that be you're having meaning and purpose for doing dirty job? Matt, do you want to expand on that?
Oh, yeah, I answered his question as he was typing. See,
okay.
Matt, I'm a futurist. I knew where you were going with that. It's funny though, just on the kids thing, I've not got kids, but I've got a lot of mates who have. I'm Uncle Dom to lots of kids. And there's a separate thread there around, I think we mistakenly are having the conversation with kids around what job they want to do when they grow up. And I think we might need to reframe that to what impact do you want to have? And I know that sounds a bit loosey-goosey, but actually it gets to a broader conversation versus if you say to a kid, what job do you want to do? They're going to pick the thing right in front of them. That's why anyone of our age group on this call wanted to be like a fireman or a policeman or whatever when you were growing up, because they were the only jobs you knew, right? And so I think sometimes, certainly with the rate of change, and Julia, I know you've got people, throughout VID talking about this in terms of skills, reskilling, the rate of change in the workforce, and there's a whole sort of thread and topic around that. But I think, the kids that are coming through the ranks now are going to have to be more resilient than we've been in terms of the number of career changes and job pivots they're going to have to do. And so anything we can do to help them understand that the impact they want to have, and then it's going to be a navigation. They're going to weave in and out, up and down. They're going to be all over the show. The idea of starting, coming out of uni and being an accountant for 45 years and then retiring, that's not going to happen in the future. So I think we need to equip them with new skills.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. Riley, who's my stepdaughter, who people know from last year, she's 10. One of the things that I got out of being at home together last year is I got to see just how diverse she was in, so all of the things that you normally happen behind closed doors at school were happening in the house. And I got to see how creative she was, how great she was at coding in Minecraft. I got to see, at one point, one of the school projects was to recreate a piece of art. And so she came downstairs with a blanket draped over her like a toga, carrying a cat that in the picture she was trying to replicate was a goat. But it was just, completely, one hand you go, that's silly, but at the same time, it's completely great because she's just giving things a go. And the fact that freedom exists is you almost don't want to shut it down.
Hell no, yeah. You're like, do more. Yeah, just go wild, child, go for it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Matt saying, I agree, my teenagers, I borrow Seth Godin's phrase, what problems in the world are interesting to you to try and solve? So I think there is more than enough in the world that needs to be solved. So why should we impose what we think those are?
Yeah, I mean, our constructs are perfect for us, for the world we've lived in, but they're mainly based on our lived experiences. And our kids are going to have very different lived experiences. And so I think the more we can sort of flunge those together, the better we'll all be. They can learn from us and we can certainly learn from them.
Yeah, and I know we both know Yasmin Paul, she's speaking later in VID around how young people can change the world. And I think, if we can get rid of some of the hierarchy, not get rid of some of the hierarchy, but acknowledge that there is as much change coming from bottom up than top down, or if we can harness both of those things, we're going to be a much better place.
Yeah, I love what Megan just said, right? I feel like we need to tap into our inner child a bit more. Like, I think, Megan, one of the things I love about working at Atlassian the most is I'm like, do I get paid for this? Like, because it's so playful. And like, we're serious about it. Like, we have serious outcomes we're trying to deliver, but we don't over-intellectualize stuff, which is so important because I work with some very, very intellectual people. And it's very easy to over-intellectualize. You're like, no, let's be playful. And so that's why, Julia mentioned before, our team playbook is all about how we play together as a team. And some of that is fun and some of it's more serious, but it's one of those things that when you do it, you're like, like, why don't we do that more? We did a Lego session the other week where we weren't allowed to use words or drawings, but we got given different themes. We played with Lego for a bit, and then we had to show the Lego and tell the story of what the Lego was depicting. And we had tears and tantrums and arguments, and it was brutal. And I'm like, this is Lego. Like, I've not even stood on a piece to upset me. It was just, but there was a way that you tap into your subconscious when we were playing with Lego, gave us a very different way of explaining the things we're struggling with and where we're at. And you're like, damn, like, that shit's powerful. And that's just Lego. That's just being playful with Lego. So I think that the more we tap into that at the right time, the better we become. And it also is brilliant for inclusivity. Like it is next level, because you're like, oh, some person's better at the written word, some person's better at presenting, some person's better at a workshop. You know what? Every adult's pretty average at Lego. And so when you piece it together, you're like, no, this is a horse. You're like, is it? Everyone's was a little bit average, but it was playful. But it got this level of explanation that was the equality in the room, and the way we shared was completely different. So yeah, I think play for us has always been important, and we've certainly amplified that in the last year or two as well.
Perfect. I think play is a nice place to finish on. And so Dom, I want to thank you for your time. It's been always as insightful conversation. And for people that want to check out the Atlassian website, I think your playbook and everything's still there. You guys are very generous in terms of what you give away and share with the world. And you can also check out Dom Price's website, so domprice.me, where he talks about his personal moral inventory, and also his TED Talk and things are there as well. Worth checking out both, super valuable in so many ways.